Welcome back to Proxima, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the Craftworld Eldar Autarch. And the Autarch is a unit that hasn't quite gotten enough love, I think, this edition, especially since a new codex dropped. Not a lot of players like it, and especially since the changes in Nephilim, a lot of people have moved away from the Autarch due to the fact that most of the time, the Autarch is a little bit of a command point sink. And while I definitely think this is true, I don't think the Autarch actually sucks. A lot of players in my gaming group, including my Uthway buddy who has been playing Uthway for years, of course, he has a negative opinion on Autarchs. He didn't always, but he certainly has one. He certainly has one now. And I have to say, I don't really fully agree with that. I still think Autarchs are a pretty solid unit, even if they do take a little bit of an investment to make work. So today we're going to be revisiting the Craftworld Eldar's Strategist. And to start off our video, of course, we're going to be doing a quick overview of what is going to be in here. We're going to be looking at the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Autarch, and there are a lot. We're going to be looking at the notable relics and warlord traits that Autarchs can take and what I think is best on them personally. And we're going to be looking at a few powerful Autarch builds that I've used to help maximize their effectiveness. So starting off with the Autarch on foot, if you look at the base stat line, they have a great weapon skill and ballistic skill. They have average movement base, but they do have upgrades that can improve that. And they're fairly squishy. Toughness 3 plus save isn't anything to write home about. However, they do have a decent number of attacks at 5, and the base cost is 85 points. This is actually a 5-point increase from when the codex dropped, which is one of the reasons why a lot of players have been a little bit more skeptical of the Autarch, because it did get increased by 5 points. And funnily enough, the Autarch actually got a little bit of a nerf in the fact that you can't take as many relics and warlord traits as you used to be able to do. So even though that is true, I think one of the main strengths of the Autarch is the fact that it can take so many different weapon options. Now, it can't take as many weapon options as it used to be able to take, which is honestly, in my opinion, a true shame. But it still does have access to the Banshee Blade, which, to be honest with you, nowadays is really just there for the relic upgrade if you are going to give the Autarch a relic. The Death Spinner, which is a pretty good, semi-decent anti-infantry weapon. And in my opinion, it's nothing to write home about. It's not super cost-effective for 10 points, in my opinion, on an Autarch. But it is pretty good, especially if you're going after something like light infantry. You can definitely clear out a good number of those with the Death Spinner. And even though, again, it's not that great against Marines, it does have the blast keyword, so it is fairly decent against larger and lighter units. And we also have the Dragon Fusion Gun, which is amazing. So the reason why I really like the Dragon Fusion Gun on the Autarch is because the Autarch has a very high ballistic skill. So you're not going to miss very often with this thing. And when it does hit, it is going to be very powerful. You can pop a lot of models with this. So a lot of Terminators have a 5+ invul. You can easily pop Terminators with this thing. You can easily pop things like land speeders or, very light vehicles, skimmer vehicles like Vipers and things like that. You can pop with this pretty easily. High strength, high AP, Assault 1, which is great because it means that you don't have to suffer the penalty for moving and shooting, which the Autarch should probably always be moving around the battlefield. The Autarch also has access to a couple of more weapons. It has access to a fusion pistol, which it does pack a punch, but its range is very limiting. So this thing looks great on the outside. It's like, oh, this is fantastic. 5 points for basically a fusion gun that has the same damage profile as the Dragon Fusion Gun, right? Very good. However, the problem with it, well, not quite the same damage. It is strength 8 versus 9. But the problem with it is it only has 6 range. So even though it can be fired in combat, typically it just doesn't have the range to be shooting every turn, especially after you drop down. It's not going to be, firing the turn you drop down out of Deep Strike, for example. And it's not going to be shooting in the first couple turns of the game, typically. So even though it is cheaper by 10 points than the Dragon Fusion Gun, that extra 6 inches of range really does make a big difference. Although there is one build that I have used with the fusion pistol that I found pretty effective. So I'll talk about that a little later in this video. And then we have the classic Reaper launcher. So the Reaper launcher is I have to say, a very odd choice, but one that I think is funny. Now, the thing about the Reaper launcher is it really doesn't have a whole lot of synergy with the actual model. So Autarchs want to be moving around a lot, moving and shooting. And most of the time, they're going to want to, at some point in the game, engage something in close combat. They are pretty good in combat. So here's the problem with the Reaper launcher. Even though it has a great range and it has multiple firing modes, it is still a heavy weapon, and it suffers from the same lack of AP the Dark Reapers have. So you're going to get not only a penalty to moving and shooting to your ballistic skill, but you're also just not going to be able to really kill anything tougher than something with a 4+ armor save, right? Marines have power armor, they have armor of contempt, and they have, some armies have a lot of different ways to deal with AP2 weapons, to be honest with you. So you're really not going to see much use out of this thing, especially on something like an Autarch, which again, is going to be moving around a lot, wanting to engage things in combat. So you're going to be wasting a lot of the upsides of this weapon when putting it on an Autarch. And I know it looks cool and everything, but still one of those weapons that probably doesn't really work on the Autarch in general. Now, I'm not saying a build can't work with it, but I don't know. I think they need to buff the Reaper launcher. I think if they buffed the Reaper launcher when they buffed Dark Reapers, I think you could make an argument that it could be much better on the Autarch. But as it stands, I don't think it's quite good enough for 15 points. And then we have the other melee weapons. So we have the Scorpion Chainsword, which honestly is a weaker version of the Starglaive. Not very good. It gives +2 strength instead of ×2 strength. The AP is less, the damage is less. The only thing is you get an additional attack. So not really the greatest weapon. Again, it's just really there to be able to be upgraded into a relic. Shuriken Pistol, of course, is the base pistol. Nothing to write home about there. Except that it also allows you to take the Kurnus' bow if you want to. So the Kurnus bow is it's one of those things that really works well in a Hail of Doom list with the right, investment of command points and Strands of Fate and so forth. But outside of that, it really just doesn't do well in my opinion, and there's better options for the Autarch. And then it has the Starglaive, which is this base weapon, and honestly, the Starglaive really packs a punch. I was really impressed when I saw this in the new codex, because basically it gives the Autarch strength 6, so it essentially gives you at all times a laser lance on charge. So think about how powerful that can be with a lot of attacks. AP -3, so slightly less AP than a laser lance, but it still has that damage too, which makes it very effective at killing Space Marines and larger models with multiple wounds. So it's actually quite a bit better than a lot of the combat weapons on this list. Now, you may be asking yourself at this point, well, Proxy Hammer, this is a lot of weapons. You said that it didn't have as much as it used to have. What is it missing? Guys, it's missing 2 of the best weapons that I used to give Autarchs all the time back in 4th edition and 5th edition. And that is, it's missing the Avenger Shuriken Catapult and it's missing the Last Blaster, which absolutely sucks. And the only reason why the Autarch would be missing these 2 items is because GW decided not to put them in the Autarch kit. So unfortunately, we don't have access to that, even though it's very easy to get access to something like a Shuriken Catapult or like a Last Blaster. And if you guys don't really trust me on that, well, believe it or not, there's some old Guardian kits that come with Last Blasters. I know that seems really weird, but there are. And old Eldar Guardians used to come with Last Blasters. I have a couple of Last Blasters hanging around in my bits box, actually. And I just never found a use for them. And I was hoping with this new codex, I'd finally find a use for it. But of course I didn't. So, yeah. So anyway, on to some of the war gear options. We have the Autarch Jump Generator. So this is basically a warp jump generator, except for the Autarch. Allows greater movement, movement 12. Has a very similar ability line to the fly keyword, without having the drawbacks of the actual keyword. So a lot of units can get bonuses against models with the fly keyword. Luckily, an Autarch Jump Generator kind of gets around that. And it allows for 2d6 battle focus and the sudden assault ability. So your Autarch can get in, shoot something, and then if it's not in range to assault, or maybe it's a risky charge, you can always battle focus 2d6 behind some obscuring terrain or something like that to keep your Autarch safe. So very good kind of extra thing that the Autarch generator has over its alternative, which is the Swooping Hawk Wings. The Howling Banshee Mask is a very good addition to the Autarch. Basically forces enemies that you charge to strike last and denies Overwatch and set to defend. So this is a really good support tech. It's only 5 points. It allows you to use the Autarch to charge in with other units and ensure that those units will strike last. So great when paired with Striking Scorpions, great when paired with Wraith Blades, things like that. I actually think Wraith Blades and Striking Scorpions are some of the best units to use the Autarch with the Howling Banshee Mask. But it's also good with Shining Spears. And with the right upgrades, you can definitely keep up with a unit of Shining Spears, either coming from reserve or just straight up on the battlefield. So there's a lot of different bonuses and buffs that you can give the Autarch to basically ensure that he keeps up with Shining Spears. The Autarch also has access to Manda Blasters, which inflict mortal wounds on 6s to wound. This is absolutely great, especially since the Autarch already has a good number of attacks. 5 attacks may not seem like a lot, but an extra mortal wound per combat phase for about 5 points is a pretty good upgrade if you're going for damage. Then you have the Swooping Hawk Wings, which of course gives you Sudden Assault, the fly keyword, and a 14-inch move. So pretty effective there for making your Autarch quicker. The Autarch also comes with a 4+ invul save, which is great against high AP and works very well with Strands of Fate to help keep your key model alive longer in combat against things like Power Fists, which would honestly easily gimp the Autarch if given the chance. So it does help greatly with that. And as for his special rules, he allows an extra command reroll per phase, which honestly doesn't really come into play a lot. I know that it seems like it would. It comes into play really a lot in the later game, but of course he has to be alive in the later game to use this, which is why that part of the ability is not that popular. However, he also has an aura that allows 1s to be rerolled to hit for Craftworld core units within 6 inches of him, which for most of our units is like a lesser guide. However, with units that have ballistic skill 2, like Shroud Runners, it's essentially a permanent guide. So as long as he's around a unit of Shroud Runners, they will always get that plus, well, basically rerolls to hit, right? Now, it's obviously worse than guide in some ways because, there could be modifiers to hit. Like, you could be firing at something in dense cover or, a unit could have an ability that, gives you a modifier to hit. But, at the end of the day, this is an aura. This could technically affect multiple units. And I think this ability is slept on a lot. I actually think it's fairly good. And I think that if Autarchs were a little bit cheaper, and I think if Autarchs were a little bit less command point intensive, I think Autarchs could be really used as a third slot in a lot of different builds because of that ability alone. As for the Autarch Skyrunner, has fantastic movement with a higher toughness and wounds, and it's 105 points. So it's a little bit more expensive, but it does come on a jet bike. Now, here's the problem with the Autarch Skyrunner though. Unfortunately, in GW's great knowledge, they decided that even though the Autarch Skyrunner and all the Autarchs are basically interchangeable with the pieces that they have, unfortunately, the Skyrunner can only take basically 3 options. You can take a Banshee Blade, which is worse in every way to the Laser Lance, and really is only there for the Relic upgrade. It can take a Dragon Fusion Gun, which is good, right? But unfortunately, it replaces the Laser Lance, so it makes the Autarch absolute garbage in close combat, which really sucks too, right? So it's basically you can't take a Dragon Fusion Gun, essentially. Unfortunately, you just can't take it because this Autarch is just really good in close combat, and you don't want to actually forgo that close combat ability for just a fusion gun. The Laser Lance here is a very powerful weapon and really the only good option as far as the weapons go. For the Skyrunner, you need to do a Laser Lance. If you're not doing a Laser Lance and you're doing the Banshee Blade, then you're probably upgrading that to a Relic anyway. So the Laser Lance as a base option is just what you're going to pick 9 times out of 10 unless you're taking a Relic. And of course, like all jet bikes, he comes with a twin shuriken catapult, which gives him a little bit more ranged firepower. Just like the Autarch on foot, he does come with a 4+ invulnerable save and always advances 6 inches, just like all jet bikes do. And for the special rules, just like the Autarch on foot, gets an extra command reroll per phase and rerolls ones to hit for Craftworld core units within 6 inches, which is a little bit better on the Skyrunner because he's a little bit faster. But again, there are ways of making the Autarch on foot faster as well. And in some ways, you can actually make him just as fast. So even though there's a bit of an advantage with the Autarch Skyrunner just being a little bit quicker base, you could obviously upgrade the Autarch on foot to be just as fast, if not just a little bit slower than this. And in most cases, it just won't really matter. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here about the Skyrunner. And, I do like the Skyrunner. I run the Autarch Skyrunner in a couple of my Bealtan lists. I think he's a really good model, but the options just really aren't there for him. I feel like he needs more options to be truly effective. He's very powerful in combat. The Laser Lance is no joke. And he comes at a base cost of 105 points, so he's not that expensive. And that's the plus sides to him. The downsides are that he really doesn't get to benefit from one of the best war gear options that's available to the Autarch on foot, which is the Banshee Mask. And again, I feel like if the Banshee Mask was given to this model, a lot more players would take it. I feel like having a model with 16-inch movement that can get even more with a cool relic like Sunstorm would be a very powerful piece in a lot of builds. And I just think that really the failing of the Autarchs isn't the stats. It's not the points cost necessarily, but as it stands, it's just the options just aren't quite there for the models. And I think, going off on a little bit of a tangent, I think that the GW no model, no rules philosophy that they've been following over the past couple of years is just not really that great if they're not willing to update and upgrade their kits to include more options. The options that we had gotten in past codexes and things like that. I really do think GW needs to kind of bunker down and say, okay, well, if we're not going to give factions like Eldar new models that are, current with a lot of the old models that they already have, then we at least need to allow players to do a little bit of conversions with the new kits that we already have. And again, there's plenty of options in the new kits. If you buy an Autarch on foot kit, there's a lot of different options that you should be able to give an Autarch Skyrunner, right? With a little bit of converting and a little bit of imagination. So again, I think it's a failing on GW's part to have that kind of a philosophy when they're not really updating their models that frequently and players are kind of having to wait sometimes 20 plus years. And, I've been playing Eldar for 20 years and models like Warp Spiders haven't been updated in absolutely forever. And in fact, I remember the funniest thing was when the 2006 4th edition codex came out. I remember being so excited for new models, and even though they upgraded models like Dire Avengers and stuff like that, models like Warp Spiders basically stayed the same. So again, I think GW, you wonder why factions like Craftworld Eldar sometimes don't sell as well and have as much longevity as armies like Space Marines do, and you wonder why. It's because you update those armies much more frequently than you do armies like us. So again, I love Eldar. I'm going to play them no matter what. Even if the models are 30 years old, 40 years old, I'm still going to use them because I love how they play. I absolutely, honestly, still love the aesthetic of them. Even the old models are really awesome and really familiar to me. But again, if you want to have new players, sometimes you got to invest a little bit. You got to invest a little bit to, make that money, make that dough, right? So anyway, that was a little bit of a rant. I kind of got off topic there, but moving on, we're going to be talking about some of the best ways of arming your Autarch with Relics and Warlord traits. So these are a list of the notable Relics and Warlord traits that stand out to me for the Autarch. So there's the Fire Saber, the Shard of Anaris, the Phoenix Gem, Sunstorm, and for Warlord traits, we have Ambush of Blades, Fate's Messenger, and of course, Falcon's Swiftness. And no, I did not include the Kurnus Bow in this, and the reason why is because I think the Kurnus Bow is really only good in one type of list, and I really want to give a better, broader view of the Autarch and not just look at a certain build and a certain type of list, and honestly something that a Farseer Skyrunner could probably use a little bit better, to be honest. So looking first at the Fire Saber, it is an absolute monster. So the Fire Saber gives +3 strength, -4 AP, and damage 2. It absolutely destroys high armor and tough targets. And on top of that, if that wasn't enough, each time the attack is made with a weapon, a hit roll of 6, not a wound roll of 6, but a hit roll of 6, inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to any normal damage. And this is just an absolutely insane and cool weapon. Honestly, one of my favorite relics in the entire book in close combat. It's the best, bar none, close combat weapon in the entire codex. It's great. And it's great on the Autarch as well. And really, you can only take it on an Autarch, of course, because only Autarchs can take a Banshee Blade or Starglaive. But honestly, absolutely amazing. The Shard of Anaris is another close combat weapon, and honestly, in many ways, it's just a lesser Fire Saber, but it is good against 1 wound targets, and there is a build with it that can basically mulch through big squads of things like demons and stuff like that and deal a lot of mortal wounds. So it gives +1 strength, -3 AP, and damage 1. Not the best thing to write home about, but the cool thing is it does get D3 +3 additional attacks each time you fight. So again, against 1 wound targets, the Shard of Anaris is going to be a little bit better than the Fire Saber, especially in situations where the extra AP doesn't matter. Against things like demons, against things like the new Imperial Guard, the Shard of Anaris is actually going to do much better and outperform the Fire Saber in those situations. So it is an option to kind of think about taking when you are, including an Autarch to be able to kill those types of units. The Phoenix Gem is a long staple that a lot of players love. It revives your character on a 2+ the first time it is killed. And because it procs at the end of the phase, this makes your character really hard to kill in a single turn. So basically, let's say your opponent kills your Farseer or Autarch in the late game with shooting. So if it just procced right away, it'd be kind of useless because your opponent would just shoot something else at it and it would die again. But it procs at the end of the phase. So at the end of their shooting phase, you roll that dice, and basically all the time, but sometimes you'll fail it. I've failed it a couple times myself. But if you pass it, which is likely, you're going to make your character stand up at the end of the shooting phase, and then your opponent is going to have to, if they want to kill him, charge in after that, which can be really disruptive, and a lot of opponents just aren't really prepared for that, especially in the later stages of the game. So it's a really good way of keeping your model alive, especially if an Autarch is in close combat, your opponent is fighting it in close combat, being able to just basically troll your opponent and revive it right after that is a really great way of keeping it alive and keeping it frustrating your enemy. And it can be used on any character, not just Autarchs. So I know this video is about Autarchs, but it can also be used on things like Warlocks and is a pretty cheeky way of getting things behind enemy lines for that secondary objective. And if your opponent cannot afford to do more than shoot them, then they're kind of out of luck. They just kind of have to let you score those secondary points. So pretty good overall relic here, especially for an Autarch. The Sunstorm relic, on the other hand, is only for the Skyrunner, but it's pretty good. It gives movement 20 and objective secured. It's great on a Skyrunner model that can make late game plays to grab objectives or move to engage enemy units normally at a range. So the cool thing again about this is that this increases the potential threat range that the model has in the late game for denial purposes. So a lot of times, your opponent is not going to want to put a key target within range of your Autarch Skyrunner's threat. So if you have a 16-inch movement and you have a 7-inch threat range of a charge, an average charge roll, you're going to probably be at about, let me do math here. You're probably going to have a threat range of about 24 inches, right? Now, this is a little bit easier to evade than if your Autarch had that extra 4 movement from the Sunstorm. So this can actually really do work in that way, but it can also give you that late game pressure of having objective secured and being able to steal objectives away from enemy units. I mean, this thing can charge into a Space Marine squad. This thing can charge into a lot of different enemy units, kill that enemy unit, and then grab the objective, or maybe the enemy unit only has 1 model left, and you're able to take that objective away from that enemy if, of course, they don't have objective secured themselves. So pretty good relic here, solid choice as always. As for Warlord traits, Ambush of Blades is something that not a lot of people take, but it's actually pretty effective with combat units. Basically gives one model or nearby core unit an additional AP in combat. It's not bad on certain units, especially when trying to pass certain armor thresholds. Like let's say that you want your Howling Banshees to charge into a unit of Terminators. Well, those Terminators are going to have really heavy armor and might still get an armor save depending on what kind of buffs and stuff that they have. Well, I mean, maybe not against Banshees, but maybe something like Striking Scorpions, right? Where they're probably going to negate a lot of their AP. So this could be really helpful at helping Striking Scorpions and other low AP units be able to mow through Terminators and stuff much easier. And the cool thing is the character doesn't have to remain within 9 inches for the unit to benefit. It casts it on the unit in your command phase. Well, not cast, but uses it on a unit in your command phase. And then that unit can benefit from it until the next command phase. So it's pretty good for that. Pretty good, again, on units like Striking Scorpions, especially that don't have a lot of AP to begin with, and helps them kind of go into Terminators a little bit better off, especially when combined with things like Jinx and Doom. It can be really effective and really cost effective for your Striking Scorpions and stuff like that. Fate's Messenger is a very defensive ability, and once per turn, it reduces a damage roll of your choice to 0 that gets past your armor and invul saves. So really great at helping your character survive because you get to choose the damage roll after the failed save. It's not like something like a Soul Weaver where you have to just take the first time you suffer a wound. So, it could be against a high damage attack like a Power Fist, a Bright Lance, maybe if you're fighting other Eldar or Dark Lance, whatever it is. You can reduce that result to 0, and then on top of that, you can use things like Strands of Fate, of course, to increase the survivability of your Autarch even further. And then the last Warlord trait is Falcon Swiftness. So Falcon Swiftness gives faster movement, ignores difficult ground, and gives an automatic 6-inch battle focus. So this makes them faster, better able to get into enemy backlines or obscuring terrain so that your unit can be out of line of sight or benefit from Lookout Sir if you move him back within your own units. And I truly believe that the true potential of this actually lies in a combination with other movement increasing abilities and the Swift Strikes Farflung Craftworld trait. So if you have this, the Falcon Swiftness that is, with Swift Strikes and a Sunstorm Relic, for example, on a Autarch Skyrunner, you can move 22 inches normally, advance 6 inches, battle focus 6 inches, which is going to equal about a 34-inch move. This is extremely fast. So this can get you in the back lines. This can get you in a place where your enemy can't retaliate against you. It has a lot of functionality and a lot of very real potential as well, because with Swift Strikes, you can actually shoot as well. So you can shoot your assault weapon, you can shoot your laser lance, and still be able to battle focus right after into a piece of terrain and be basically targetable by most weapons. So very great trait, especially when combined with other relics and stuff like that. So there's basically 4 builds that I've kind of had, and I've had multiple builds, but these are actually 4 of the ones that I've actually liked. I've tried a bunch of different Autarch builds over the years, and these ones in this current edition stood out to me as being some of the best and most functional. So we have the Drake, the Phoenix, the Crone, and of course the Lancer. So the Drake happens to be my favorite, and it's also a great Seinfeld reference if anyone has ever watched that show. But basically, everybody loves the Drake, right? And what we have here is an Autarch with a Fire Saber, a Dragon Fusion Gun, and Manda Blasters. And basically, the Drake is a really effective bunker buster that can deal a high amount of mortal wounds and high AP to tough targets like Terminators. So essentially, this is how it works. You run one of these alongside a unit of, say, Howling Banshees, and you basically use them to crack open tough targets. So a 10-man Terminator unit that's extremely tough, you have your Banshees, you have your, Drake Autarch, and you charge them in together, and the Autarch is doing mortal wounds not only on 6s to hit, but 6s to wound as well. So if you have that target doomed and you have, maybe Jinx or something on it as well, on that unit as well, you're going to be doing an extreme amount of damage between the Autarch, the Howling Banshees, to that unit of Terminators, and they are going to trade up significantly. Again, 10 Terminator blocks are 400 plus points. An Autarch with the Drake loadout is only 105 points. It costs 1 command point for the Fire Saber. And the Banshees are going to cost around 100 points as well. So that's half the points. And with a little bit of assistance, you can actually probably be able to kill that unit of Terminators. So it's very effective, especially, I've seen some stuff lately about Thousand Suns lists. And actually, one of my subscribers told me about Thousand Suns running a lot of Terminators and stuff like that, which didn't cross my mind as being that competitive. But apparently, there's been some tournaments lately that Thousand Suns are actually really doing well with large blocks of Terminators. And the cool thing about Eldar is Eldar have a lot of abilities and debuffs that can really affect these units in a great way. Throwing Jinx on a unit like that, or throwing Doom on a unit like that, if you can get past their denials, of course, which shouldn't be too hard with all the Strains of Fate and stuff we have access to. But, you could really put a huge dent in a unit like that for not a lot of investment. So this build is absolutely fantastic in my opinion, and it's one of the builds that's the least command point intensive. You run it with a unit of something like Howling Banshees and you just absolutely watch as it just melts enemy Death Stars and things like that. And of course, if you want to give your Autarch a Warp Jump Generator or Hawk Wings for a little bit of extra mobility, you can certainly pay the extra points for that as well. The next build that we have for the Autarch is called the Phoenix. So the Phoenix is armed with a Starglaive, just basic base weapon, a Fusion Pistol, Swooping Hawk Wings, and Banshee Mask. So the Fusion Pistol is actually something that's not really needed. I've just personally found success with it. I had a couple extra points and I threw that on the Autarch, and honestly, I wasn't really disappointed in it. I have to be honest. On this build particularly, the goal is going to be to engage enemy units in combat, so you're often going to be using the Fusion Pistol more than you would normally. So basically, this Autarch is also given 2 upgrades, the Fate's Messenger Warlord trait and the Phoenix Gem Relic. And this really makes the Autarch very tough and very sticky. This Autarch loves to stick in combat and stay around for a long time. Now, in full disclosure, I did use this Autarch build in a smaller type of list. I used it in a couple of 1,000-point games and a couple of 500-point games as well, and it did very well. However, I did invest a lot into it. I did, make sure that it stayed alive with Strands of Fate and things like this. But with this combined with Fate's Messenger and the Phoenix Gem, it was basically unkillable and very frustrating for my opponent to deal with. And in larger point games, this is a type of unit that can stick to a flank, that can really be effective at staying on one side of the battlefield and being an absolute thorn in your opponent's side. So, again, really durable in combat, hard to take out in a single round because of the Phoenix Gem. However, it is a little bit more points and, of course, command point intensive. So it does cost 2 command points for this guy, and, of course, it costs 110 base points. And up next, we have the Crone. So the Crone, just as the name suggests, is a Banshee-oriented model. So it has a Fire Saber, the Banshee Mask, and it either has Swooping Hawk Wings or the Autarch Jump Generator. And you can give this one the Ambush of Blades Warlord trait to improve the AP of a nearby combat unit. This is very effective. And this costs 105 points or 2 command points because of the Ambush of Blades and the Fire Saber. So this variant is basically just designed to support other units like Striking Scorpions or Wraith Blades and deny Overwatch and force opponents to strike last in close combat. So basically this would accompany something like a squad of Wraith Blades or a squad of Striking Scorpions and make sure that those Scorpions and Wraith Blades don't take Overwatch and they don't get counterattacked or anything like that. That stratagem that allows an enemy unit to interrupt your combat sequence to fight next. The Banshee Mask actually makes sure that that unit would not be eligible to do that. So it's a great way to get around that. And also, honestly, the Crone does very good damage. The Fire Saber is a very strong weapon, even though it doesn't have the Manda Blasters to back it up. So it doesn't do quite as much damage as the Drake, but it still does pretty significant damage and support. And the last build that I have is the Lancer. So the Lancer is just an Autarch Skyrunner. There's not much you can do with it, just has a laser lance. That's it. Now, what I like to do with this is I like to give it either the Sunstorm or the Fire Saber relic. Personally, though, I like the Sunstorm a little better. The Laser Lance is good enough to where the Fire Saber isn't super good by comparison. It just obviously does mortal wounds, so it is still better, but it's not so much better that I would be at a super loss if I didn't take the Fire Saber on him. And that opens up a couple of options. That opens up the Sunstorm, which is my personal favorite on the Autarch Skyrunner, the Lancer. And if you combine this with the Warlord trait, Falcon Swiftness, it's especially effective because just like I said before, the Sunstorm allows you to move 20. With Falcon Swiftness, it's 22 inches. And then, of course, you also get a 6-inch automatic battle focus with this, as well as the fact that you're just going to be getting a 6-inch automatic advance just for being a Skyrunner. So this is a very mobile option and gives you a lot of flexibility on what you're going to do with your Autarch at any given turn. It does cost 105 points, which is actually cheaper than a lot of the foot Autarch builds that we have. And it does cost 2 command points to do it this way. So the thing I like about this Autarch is that it's very flexible and has the speed to get wherever needed, and it has pretty solid punching power that can rip apart small units of mech equivalent enemies, off objectives, and things like that. And again, its true potential, I believe, is unlocked with the Swift Strikes stratagem, Far-Flung Craftworld trait, which allows the unit to both advance and use battle focus in the same turn without taking a penalty to hit. Which, to be honest, the Autarch Skyrunner probably isn't going to be doing anyway, because it's not like it can take a Reaper launcher like it could in the past. But even so, very good at ripping, again, enemies off of objectives, and can be a little bit of flexible, right? It can be used to support units of, say, Shroud Runners and things like that, because it has the speed to catch up with them. And it can also be used as a quick assault unit and a counter assault unit, right? Something that if somebody charges into your Shroud Runners and, you've overwatched, you've done everything you can, they still make it into combat, then you have this guy to at least support to make sure that enemy unit doesn't escape unscathed. So in conclusion, while Autarchs do require more investment in both points and command points, they can make excellent fighters and support characters on the battlefield. And I think one of the things that's missing from these guys, again, I don't think it's their actual stats. I think their stats are pretty good. The problem with them is that because of GW's rule that states if there's no model, there's no rules, which kind of eliminates a lot of the options for the Autarch Skyrunner and also the regular Autarch, you kind of run into problems with that, and there's a lack of options for one of the more powerful models in our codex, which is the Autarch Skyrunner, potentially, right? So again, Autarchs probably still a bit too expensive given that their options aren't the, most fleshed out. And they're certainly expensive in command points to give them those Relics and Warlord traits, which they really do need to be super impactful figures on the battlefield. I do think despite that, they can be very powerful when used and built correctly. So if you are willing to invest the two or one command points in the Autarch, either on foot or the Skyrunner, you will get a lot of return out of them if you can use them correctly. Now, I am going to be an advocate for the Drake here. The Drake build, I think, is still one of the best ways to build an Autarch in the entire book. And the reason why I think this is just it has so much offensive punching power for the points. You really don't get that in other places outside of, say, a Phoenix Lord like Cahandras or, a unit of Howling Banshees or Striking Scorpions. You really don't get much more punching power than that. And it does cost 2 command points. Again, somebody might argue that they would rather just pay the 50 extra points or 60 extra points 50 extra points for Cahandras and just call it a day. But, the Autarch has a lot of other abilities that a model like Cahandras doesn't have. So, again, I think there is an argument to be said if you're willing to invest the command points in that and the points in that, and you were willing to give up a slot, which if you're running something like a battalion, you could still have your 2 Farseers and the Autarch as well. Now, there are a couple of things I wish the Autarch could do. I do wish the Autarch was an aspect warrior. That would be cool. I don't think it has the aspect keyword though, unfortunately. If anybody knows any different, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it doesn't have it. I'm almost positive it doesn't really have it, but that would help. That would help it be able to basically proc Wrath of Cain for our secondary objectives and things like that. I think that would be really useful. But even so, it's a great support model for Aspect Warriors. It's a great support model for things like Howling Banshees and Striking Scorpions, depending on how you build it. And it can be a very effective tool for, supporting backline units as well, with its rerolls of 1 to hit until it's ready to engage on your terms. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. This ended up kind of being a long video about Autarchs. I really didn't expect to, have a long video about this topic. I was expecting to just kind of have, a couple of builds, mention some things that Autarchs do good and stuff like that. But I have to say, I really got into this one. And on a personal level, I've always really liked Autarchs. And I remember when the 4th edition Codex came out and these guys were first introduced, it was like candy to a lot of Eldar players. Finally, here was a model we could personally customize however we wanted with whatever weapons we wanted from the Codex, from any aspect. And to a large degree, we can still do that. I do think they need to bring back some of the aspect weapons, though, like the Last Blaster. And of course, they need to bring back the Avenger Shuriken Catapult. And, it's kind of sad that the Eldritch Omens box didn't come with some of that stuff. But, alas, you have to work with what you get, I guess, as an Eldar player. But anyway, so yeah. And also, I'd love to hear your guys' build ideas for Autarchs. I know you guys probably run them a little bit of, differently than I do. And I really want to hear what you guys have, in the works. I want to hear what your strategies are for equipping Autarchs and why you equip them the way you do and what they're armed with. Just let me know in the comment section. I really appreciate, again, all of your guys' support, all of your guys' just comments and likes and all that stuff is really awesome to see. And the other day I was looking at, my channel and I realized that finally, after the hack and everything happened, we're finally back up to about 520 subscribers, which is fantastic. I think we're at like 890 or something like that before the hack went down and, my account got deleted and all that. So I'm glad that we're back on the right track and that, players are coming back, watching the content and, taking something away from it. So I'm really glad that you guys are back and the channel is on the right path again and that we're, finally getting back to the place that we were. So awesome. Thanks guys for all the support. As always, thank you so much. And I hope to see you guys in the comment section once again. All right, everybody, peace out. That's going to be it for today. I will see you guys later. Have a great one, everybody. And I'm going to try to get another video out by the end of the week, probably on how to play 1,000-point games, smaller games. So stay tuned for that one. And as always, also leave some ideas of videos. If you have them, I'd be more than happy to take a look at them and create a video on that topic. See you later, everybody. And as always, have a good one.